Coming up on episode 186 of Creative Writing, I'm talking all about book formatting.
I can't go back to sleep, it's almost light. These restless thoughts have kept me up again tonight.
Hello and welcome to Creative Writing. This is the podcast for you, an author who wants to sell more books without being smarmy. And I'm your host, Kirsten Oliphant. I'm so glad that you're listening, whether it's your first or 186th time to listen to the podcast. And I know what you may be thinking. Book formatting sounds boring, but I'm going to try to keep it not boring and give you just actionable information that you need, because unless you're traditionally published, where you probably don't have a choice in this, if you're an indie and you're self-publishing, you got to think about this and figure out how to get it done. So I'm going to answer some questions that I hear often and share some opinions, because I realized I have some kind of strong opinions about stuff. So we're going to get into that. If you want to go to the show notes, I'm going to have links to a few things I'm referencing, Facebook groups and resources. And so you will go to creativewriting.com/186 to get to the episode show notes, and that will help you, just get to links and things like that. Because I'm actually looking up right now. There's actually a book I'm going to reference, and I realized I didn't look it up. So we're looking that up right now. Okay. Yeah, good information there. So we're going to dive into book formatting and talk about this because it matters. And the things we're going to talk about, what matters in terms of book formatting, where and how you get it done, little things that you might think about, like how to format text messages. And then I'm going to have a list of questions that I think you should ask yourself when it comes to formatting before you get into it or while you're in the process of it. So the first thing, why does this matter? Why do we need to know? And that's because if you're in charge of getting your books out to these different platforms where they are for sale, whether you're selling direct on your website or somewhere else, you have to think about what format. So if you're using something like Amazon, it needs to be an emoji file. And if you're doing it on Apple Books and Google Play and all those places, it usually is an EPUB file, or you might be selling PDFs off of your website. But whatever the case, you have to be creating, like writing in one place and then somehow converting it into those files. And so I'm going to focus more on just text-based things because maybe I'll give a little bit of tips about images, but it's just there's a whole lot of things that come with like pretty books and things like that. And it's just not the same. So we're going to focus on text-based books today. So you need to get it from, if you're writing in Word or Google Docs, which is what I've been using, or Scrivener, whatever you're using to write with, you have to convert it. And I'm usually going from Google Docs to Word because it goes from Word to my formatter, which is Vellum. So you need to figure that out. And really, when we're thinking about book formatting, we need to focus on what matters. And we need to remember that because I think it can be really easy to get distracted. And I see a lot of people spending more time on things like this than they need to. So what really matters when a book is reaching a reader's hands is the reader experience. And some people really think that means it needs to be cool and neat, but honestly, it needs to just be not distracting. It doesn't have to be pretty. You don't have to have special icons with every chapter heading. You don't have to have like a fancy page break or any kind of like beautiful thing. And I have seen some beautiful books out there with some specialized formatting, and I'm going to give you a recommendation later if you want to do that. But ultimately, the readers don't care. They might think that's cool, but what they need is a book that they can read that does not have strange issues, okay? So that's what matters, the reader experience. And I think consistency also matters. So if you're doing a series, as much as possible, format the books the same. I've read through some series and I continued reading them, but I did notice when like one book didn't have the same like chapter headings as all the other books in the series did. So people do notice and they prefer consistency. And actually there was a reader group recently where people were going off just this week about that. So that matters. Like you want to have consistency between your books. Again, not a huge thing. Overall, the goal with our formatting is not to be distracting from the story, which again, it doesn't need to be fancy. So that's the main goal, right, of book formatting. So I'm just leading with that so that we can not waste so much time on it. It needs to be not distracting from the reader's experience so they can fall into the story and stay there. The end. Like that's the basic thing. So technically speaking, when we're going from whatever it is we're writing to getting into those formats, the MOBI, the EPUB, the PDF, whatever you need, there's a lot of different ways to do that. And when I first started in 2013, which was so long ago, I remember very distinctly staying up until 4 a.m. trying to get a clickable table of contents, which is something they want on Amazon. So like if you're in the table of contents, you could click on like one chapter and it'll take you there. And I formatted. And then there were weird extra spaces and some characters that like were not showing up in the Word doc. It was a nightmare going through that. And it's so much better now, but you can still spend way too much time. So we're not going to do that. So some of the things you may write in will kind of put it out in that format. So like you can go directly from Word to MOBI. You can go, I think Scrivener exports in different things. Scrivener is another writing program. So you can use those kinds of things. What I use and what a lot of authors use is Vellum, and it works only on a PC, but there is an option to get Mac in the cloud, and I don't know how to use that because I don't. I would highly recommend picking up a book by Jody Skinner, who's a community member. Hey, Jody. And it's called Format Your Book with Vellum. Very simple. And it does have the notes in it for the PC users who want to use Vellum. It's, I think, about a $200 product, $250 if you want the print book, because that's the thing with Vellum is I use it for my print books as well. And it is easy to use, easy to customize. It will take away all of those issues, because the other thing I had issues with, besides the table of contents, which it creates automatically for you, is the whole thing when you're doing a print book and the margins, which like just raise your hand where you're at home if you have ever had the issue with your print books and the margins and you're like, I swear I have done the margins and they're right and they're not. Vellum does that for you. You don't have to worry. So it 100% is worth the cost if you're publishing a lot of books. The other options are you can pay someone. So there are formatters that you can hire. Some of them are people who are like virtual assistants or personal assistants, or there are people that do it on Fiverr. There are some people who do like proofreading and other things also include the formatting. The issues I've seen with paying someone is sometimes people are charging like $200 just to format a book. Reality, you do not need that. You do not need that if you are doing a simple text document. If you are considering paying that much, just get Vellum. And I don't care if you're on a PC, get the Mac in the cloud, get Jody's book and figure it out. It is not worth that because formatting generally does not take that long. When I'm formatting a book, and I'll talk about text messages, I go and format my text messages in a separate way. All of that takes me at the most 15 minutes. Period. So I'm not sure what's going on with people charging several $100s to format a book, but it should not cost that even for a print book. I'm talking 15 minutes ebook and print. The end. So that's why I like Vellum. But you can pay someone. The issue, say you find a typo and you need to go back and fix that. Often, if they've given you a MOBI file, you're not going to be able to edit it. You're going to have to go back to Word or whatever and edit it and then get another file from them, and they're probably going to charge you. So that was, in the beginning, I was paying someone, and that's what I found to be the case. I wanted to change like my back matter or change something else, and then that paying someone, which, I wasn't paying much because, again, formatting shouldn't cost that much. It's not super complex, but it still required paying them every time. Another option, you can go straight from Word. And there's a great video I'm going to link to from Michelle Pennington from the Writing Gals on simple Word formatting. And if you're like, I'm a newbie, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm writing in Word, highly recommend that video tutorial. It's great. And if you're, you're never going to go to the show notes, go to YouTube and look for the Writing Gals and then look for Michelle Word formatting and you'll find it. Another option, Kindle Create, which is a part of the KDP dashboard. And I think you can actually, I have not used Kindle Create. I know people who have and like it, but I think it's actually like a software you can download for free on your computer. Problem with that, it will only work for Amazon, right? So that's like a very specific formatting choice. Vellum and doing Word and the other things, you're able to format in one thing and put it on multiple platforms, but Kindle Create will only work for Amazon. So if you're going to publish to other platforms, you're not going to be able to use that. Another option is Draft to Digital, and that's free. And sometimes people have questions about that. So if you want to try Draft to Digital, you just sign up for an account, and then what you do is you're going to go and add a book. And there's like 3 different pages of information you're going to get to before you get to the formatting option. And I think people get really confused because they're in there just looking for a formatting tool. It takes those 3 levels to get there. And it's a really nice, simple tool because it just uploads and then it reads kind of your file. So you're using a Word file, you're uploading it, and it reads where the chapter headings are. And it has, a handful of styles that you can choose from, and you can see a preview of those. So you can be really simple. You can add a few fancy flourishes, but because it's not a program where you can go change things like inside of it. So like if I want to format a text message, I can do that in Vellum. They just take your document in Draft Digital and run it through a program and spit it back out. So you can't go customize things once you upload it. It has to be already customized, which means in Word, you're going to have to already be like every chapter heading, you want to highlight it and make that a heading 1. You want to have page breaks between your chapters. Those are kind of the basic things as you're formatting. Should have led with that, but that's going to help you a lot no matter what you're using if you're going ahead and doing just those simple things. Chapter headings, chapter 1, or if it has a name, you just highlight it, heading 1 in the formatting, and then everything else should be normal. But Draft Digital is a great option. So when I first started out, I was using Draft Digital. I paid somebody on Fiverr. I think with one book, I did a simple Word formatting, and then I went ahead and bought Vellum. Once I made a certain amount a month, that was my thing. Once I make $300 a month, we're going to go ahead and buy Vellum. And I did, and that's been 2 years worth of, or more than 2 years worth of good investment. So those are some options for you. And if you want to have fancy flourishes, I'm going to recommend Bookly Style. And if you can look, it's again, go to the show notes, creativewriting.com/186. But there's a Facebook group by Michelle Craven, and she does artistic things in your book. And so I've seen some beautiful books. Again, I don't care. I'm just reading, but I do notice. And so if it is really important to you, and I think some genres like epic fantasy, those things can be really neat and really attract readers. So she does some styles, like you can pay her and it's a very reasonable amount. And she will design custom things that can go in your book and then help you figure out how to get them formatted. So if you want to be fancy, you can do that. So that's another option. So basically using Word or Scrivener or Google Docs, I always have to move it over to Word. But you're going to want to have those headings for the chapters, everything else normal, page breaks between, and then you can use Vellum. You could pay someone. You could just use that simple Word formatting, Kindle Create, or Draft to Digital. And it kind of depends on where you're planning to put out your book. Little things about formatting. Okay, so we've talked about where and how. And again, I just want to reiterate, do not pay $200 for someone to format your book unless they're like including gold dust or you're doing something that's really complicated. It should not cost that much. But little things I want to talk about just in terms of how formatting should look and things you might consider, and I'll share some of my opinions on them. When it comes to indentations and things like that, nonfiction, sometimes and often, and I'm not talking creative nonfiction, like memoirs and things like that, I'm going to shove into the fiction category. But nonfiction, some of the times you will see books that have kind of a normal indent, like when the paragraph starts, the first line will be indented a little bit, and there's no space between the paragraphs. Some nonfiction books, there will be no indent, and it looks a little bit more like some blog posts do. There's no indent, but there is a blank white space between each paragraph, okay? When you're doing fiction, so you have that option with nonfiction, and I've seen books doing it both ways. I think look around at the books in your genre if you're doing nonfiction, see what they're using, see what you like. There's some leeway there. With fiction books, it should always be that there is an indent and there is no white space between the paragraphs. Now, sometimes you'll see the white space between the paragraphs, and you shouldn't. It should not be there when you have an indent. And that can actually, there were cases where a lot of people were doing what's called book stuffing on Amazon, where they were doing Kindle Unlimited. So they wanted the most amount of pages in their books. So they would add all those extra spaces in order to get more pages read, to get more money. And so Amazon sometimes will crack down on things like that. So it shouldn't be there. You don't need those extra spaces. You don't want to look like a book stuffer. So with fiction, it's just indenting the first line and then having a space between the paragraphs. So I've seen people mess that up. And like for the most part, I'll still read a book if they do one or the other, but I note it and I make note of it. So that's something to think about. In terms of justification, whether you justify the right edge or not. And what that means is if you're justifying, and this is most traditional books and print books for sure. Print for sure is justified. It means all of the letters will end at the same spot on the right-hand side as well as the left. So the right and left are mirror images of each other. They line up completely in that nice little rectangle. That's always how it should be in print. And in ebooks, people vary. I was in the justify camp where it was, yes, justified to be neat until I started reading more and more and more on my Kindle app and also making the text bigger. Because yes, I'm older now and I have bigger text. And at night, sometimes to be easier on my eyes, I make it super big. And when you're justifying, because it has to end at that same time, sometimes it will split words where it shouldn't. Sometimes it will add very weird spaces. And often in things like dialogue, it'll just make I don't know, one book I was looking at, it made all these crazy spaces between the letters. And it looks like the author made a mistake. And actually, I got an email from a beta reader this week, and I accidentally had that justify setting on in Vellum. And so she got a copy, was justified, and she was like, there's a mistake in your spacing. And I panicked because like the book's already up. Let me see. And she sent me screenshots, and all it was justifying. It was not me. It was not anything else. It was just in order to keep that firm line on the right-hand side, it has to do weird stuff. So I don't justify for my ebooks, and I do for print. And that's a choice people make, but that is why I choose not to justify, because of the reader experience. Because again, that is my ultimate goal, is the reader experience with my books, not whether it looks fancy, not anything else, the reader experience. And I don't want my readers to be pulled out of a story because it looks like something's wrong because it's trying to justify. So that's another option that you have. Images, when you are doing images in a book that's text heavy, like a novel, you just have to be careful because the formatting can be very wonky and strange. It can add to your deliverability costs, which can bring down your profit. So like instead of making like $2 per book, you might make $1.50 or something. It's probably not going to be that extreme, but it can add to your file size, which adds to the deliverability. So I tend to not put any images, even other book cover pictures. I tend to, like if it's like also by the author, I just have a list and links in there. So just think about that. If it's really important to you to have images, if they have to be there because of deliverability issues, and that goes as well for, like a recommended bookly style. But when you're adding any of those images in, and she has some really neat ones, like the first page of a chapter has this beautiful, you'll just have to go and see really beautiful images, but all that adds to deliverability. And is that worth it to you? You'd have to kind of look and see and maybe ask people how much did it impact that? Something else that I feel kind of strongly about is text messages. And, we're in this day and age where we also have social media and email and things like that. And I've seen there's a lot of options, and there really isn't necessarily one standard. And if you can go ahead and give me a link, I've seen some links like this is how you should do it. Well, no, there isn't really a gold standard. And just like with house style, like whether you're choosing APA or Chicago Manual of Style, or whatever it is you subscribe to, whether you're using the Oxford comma or spelling out numbers, there's all those different things. You need to consider what your personal house style is for text messaging. And I want to make the case for what I use, which is the person's name in bold, a colon, and then the words typed out that are in the text. And that may include misspellings. I would not use emojis because that's an image, and some of them are copyrighted, I believe, or trademarked because they're images that were created by somebody. And also they may not translate to all devices well, so don't use that. But you could use the simple, like where you put a colon and the parentheses for a smiley face. If you need to, I would probably leave those out. I have seen people try to there was one book with tweets actually where they took screenshots of the tweets and put them in there, and you couldn't read them. It was too small. So things like that, you don't want to be fancy. And the reason that I like the name, colon, and then the text, you have to think about audio as well. And if you're eventually going to put your book into audio, I've seen people format text messages all kinds of ways. Italics, which I find very hard to read. You don't want lots of italics. Some people put them in quotes, but then it looks like someone's talking, not texting. And some people just put them all as separate lines. Well, if there's no name beside it, in audio, it's a lot harder to know who's speaking. And I do know that narrators will often change their voice to some degree for each voice. But it's still, I've heard examples of books where they don't have a name beside the text, and it's very distracting and very confusing, and it can get to that point easily where you're like, whoa, who's saying what? And I listened on audiobook to a book called Tweet Cute, and they did a fantastic job because they have Twitter in there and they have texting and all kinds of things. I would recommend, I don't know how it looks in print, but I know in audio, they had the name. So they were talking on an app as well. And so they'd say like Bluebird and then what Bluebird was saying. So I would highly recommend using the name every line. And I like bold and colon. You could do it without bold, but quotes makes it confusing because it seems like dialogue. So you need to be consistent, but there are things to consider. And I would highly recommend doing it the way that I do for audio and for clarity. Someone asked a question in a group, like, what if they're getting a text and they don't know? You put unknown. I've done that. I've seen that done as well. Unknown, colon, and then the words. And when we're getting to things like tweets and social media, you want it to look like, to be clear, that's what it is. But you also don't need to include all the stuff. I just listened to another book with emails, and at the beginning of every email, they gave the timestamp and the email address. And like, I understand that, but I was listening to it and it was like ridiculously irritating. So again, reader experience, you want them to understand who's speaking. You want them to understand, is it dialogue? Is it a text? Is it an email? Is it social media? They should understand that. And part of that is how you lead into it. Like, he texted her. But if you're just saying he texted her colon and then quotes, that kind of works. But I think setting it off does work better. But again, this is up to you. There's no one way, but you need to think about reader experience. You need to think about audio. Drop caps. This is something sometimes at the beginning of chapters people will do where it's like one big letter, or a lot of the letters are in all caps or small caps. There's a lot of different options there, and I think a lot of them work really well. Just think about, I do think it helps to have something at the very first first chapter, or if there's like a page break in the middle of the chapter, that very next line, something to set it off. But the huge letters can look weird. Like I said, I make my font big. It's like I usually will use a small drop cap, or there's one option where like the first 3 words are all in caps, but not in like giant letters. They're just all in caps. So it helps people to know where they're starting. And so that's just something to think about. You may not want something huge, but just something there. Those are, I think, the main things I think about when I'm thinking about formatting, whether you're justifying, whether you're using images or not, texting and other social media forms, the spaces and the starts of paragraph and drop caps. And so those are some of the big things to consider. And I want to leave you finally with some questions to ask when you're considering formatting. And the main one that you need to ask, does it serve the reader? And I have seen a lot of authors in different groups insisting on some crazy thing that they just love, and it's like it just doesn't serve the reader. And which the next question that follows, is it distracting? So you might think this is a really cool thing, but is it distracting? So the book I read where they did screenshots of the tweets, so it looked like really Twitter, you couldn't read them. So each one I was trying to make my thing bigger, my screen bigger, because I'm reading on a Kindle app on the phone. You have to realize people are all on different devices and different sizes, and some things just don't translate. So images and things like that don't work. Does it cost money? Is it going to cost you money to pay for it? Because formatting is not where I would suggest you spend your money. You want your formatting to not be distracting, and that should not cost money, right? Does it cost money to do something fancy? And then does it cost in deliverability? Is it going to add up because you're adding all of these images that are on every page? Another one you're going to think about is the guidelines for the publisher. So what does Amazon say about spaces? And so you'll want to go look at KDP's formatting. And I'm not even getting into that because Amazon's terms of service for everything are insanely confusing. So you can go look, are there things that are prohibited by them? If you're going wide and you're using Apple Books and some of those others, you cannot have a link to Amazon in your books. I don't know if you knew that. You can't have one. So when you're using draft to digital, if you're uploading to that, they're going to say you can't do this if you're distributing through them. So draft to digital also will distribute your books. I should have mentioned this, but you don't have to distribute with them to get that free formatting with them. You just format it. The distribution is the next step, where you choose to have draft to digital, push it out to all the retailers, and then you give them a percentage. But if you are going to put your books on those other things, you can't have links to Amazon and other retailers. So you could use a universal link that's on draft to digital. They have that, books to read. You could use Pretty Links, which is a WordPress plugin. The point being, you need to know what those retailers that you're uploading to, if they have requirements, and make sure you're fitting them. What's the standard? Like I mentioned with texting, there's not always a standard. And I've heard some people try to put a standard out there, but some of the things I've heard people suggesting is the way we should do it is not helpful for readability. It is also not helpful for audio. So again, reader experience is king over that. But if there's a standard for something, the Oxford comma, we have choices about them, but there are certain things you don't have choices. 2 spaces after a period. Y'all, I'm sorry if you're still in the camp that does that, just stop. Okay, the standard is no. Get over it, because it's not a big enough deal. Spend some time mourning and then stop doing the 2 spaces after the period. That's the standard. Think about another question. How is this going to translate for audio? And I think that's an important thing to think about if you're thinking long term and you want something in audio. Is this the way I'm formatting, like tweets, for example? How will this work when someone's reading it and it's the same person and not 2 people switching back and forth? How is it going to work in audio? And the final question goes back to my favorite thing, ROI, the return on investment. Where could I better spend my time and money than book formatting? And I will tell you, the answer is almost anywhere. Okay. You want to have the basic formatting correct so it doesn't distract the reader. The end. So this is an important thing to talk about, but it doesn't mean that you have to spend a whole lot of time or money doing it. And once you find a system, whether that's using Vellum or just using Word, something else, once you find your system and have done it a couple times, it's easier. But don't spend the majority of your time or even a lot of time or a lot of money on formatting. Okay. All right. So if you, again, want to find links to things I've mentioned, you can go to the show notes, creativewriting.com/186. And I hope that this has been helpful, because this is a very practical nuts and bolts kind of thing that we don't talk about very often. And if you have questions about this, you can join the Creative Writing Facebook group, where it's free and it's a wonderful supportive community. And you can find that by going to creativewriting.com/community, and we can talk about formatting. And I bet some of y'all will have opinions too, and we will all express them with kindness and respect, because that's how it works in the group. Because I make sure of it, and you guys are awesome. I really appreciate you listening to the show. I never ask for reviews because I just don't care. But if you love the show, a review would be great. That's fine. But I would rather you connect personally, because I don't care about the reviews. I care about getting to know the listeners more. So you can join the Creative Writing community, again, creativewriting.com/community, or you can join my weekly email list where I send out resources, tips, and more on Fridays. And that's creativewriting.com/quickfix. A huge shout out to Jasmine Commerce of JasmineCommerceMusic.com for the music you are hearing on the show. She's amazing, and I would love for you to go and support her. She's an indie musician, so she needs support just like we indie authors need support. Now, it is the time where I send you out to go create content that you love and serve your people well.